Hello, Podcast Collective Consciousness. I hope all is well in your world. This is the Reconsider Simon podcast. In this audio space, I'll explore consciousness, ufology, high strangeness, the esoteric, spirituality, even the very essence of reality itself. Podcast number 9, Journal 3, Mam Tor, Hand of Glory, 1980's UFO Wave, Solar Eclipse. Greetings, hello. So, Reconsider Simon podcast. I'm looking at Journal 3. I'm doing these every month or so now, and it's just a kaleidoscopic collection of various bits and bobs, things that have been going on in my life. Things that I've maybe read, watched, or even heard. So let's get to it. So in today's audio piece, I'm going to be talking about how I went for a walk. I stretched my legs in the Peak District National Park. More specifically, I walked up a big hill called Mam Tor, which is in Castleton. Going to be discussing that. So hopefully maybe going forward with Reconsider Simon, trying to maybe move away from being at a computer screen all the time. So I'm going to attempt at vlogging some of these journeys and trips that I do, see how that goes, see if I'm good at it, see if I'm okay. So that's something that's going to happen in the future. So I bought a new camera for that, and I just tested it on the Peak District run when I went to Castleton and Mam Tor. And yeah, I wasn't generally there specifically to kind of mine content and have interesting, experiences. It was just about just going out to the countryside, just relaxing, just being in nature, which I was. And yeah, but it's just after the fact I started to read up on the area because it was, the landscape and the geology and everything, and historically it looked quite interesting. And it wasn't a huge amount in terms of like earth energies or high strangeness. But there was some, occult information I found quite fascinating. More specifically, a thing called the Hand of Glory, which I'll be talking about. And yeah, like I mentioned, I got a whole idea about maybe potentially vlogging in the future. And, where could I go to do that? And one sort of main site I've been considering for a while now has been Rendalsham Forest. And this is quite a major event in sort of early 1980s. Many of you probably have heard about it. In terms of it's a UFO visitation, really kind of close quarters visitation involving lots of military personnel. More specifically, these were kind of United States soldiers, which were based at a RAF base quite close by. And yeah, it was incredible amount of information. It's always deemed as being Britain's Roswell incident because it was such a huge contact experience for the people involved. And as I said, this event, this quite momentous event, happened in the 1980s. And it was quite by accident, really, because the previous podcast I was talking about Todmorden. And if you haven't listened to that podcast, this area in Todmorden in the United Kingdom, it's in a old county called Yorkshire. And Todmorden is quite a place of high strangeness. It appears there's a lot of interesting energies going through there. It has an obelisk on top of a hill, and a lot of evidence to back up the fact that it was actually funded by Freemasonry and a lot of Freemasonry activity going on around there. But yeah, it all goes a bit down the rabbit hole. There's talk of witches' covens and quite a momentous UFO contact experience involving a policeman and then a disappearing and the death of a miner who lived close by to there as well. And there's a lot of connections with this policeman's UFO experience and potentially the death of this miner as well. So it was a big story at the time. And yeah, I just realized actually two of these huge contact experiences, one happening in Yorkshire, which is the Todmorden one, and then one happening, I think it's East Anglia actually, for the Rendalsham Forest. They were both in the 1980s, which is, quite strange. These days you have a lot of people potentially seeing UFOs, but they're quite high in the sky. They're up in the distance. Not to my knowledge, you tend to get a lot of very close-up contact experiences that are happening these days. So it's unusual that he's had these two huge contact experiences happening in one particular year. And then just having a general look around the internet, as one does, I started to discover there are other similar, quite big UFO contact experiences happening in other countries. One was in Afghanistan, when Russia was at war with Afghanistan, and they were using the Western powers were potentially using some of the Afghan forces there as proxy armies to fight against Russia, and there was a lot of UFO activity going around that particular time. And yeah, and it's deemed the 1980s as being this kind of UK UFO wave of experiences. And it's not just these kind of big contact experiences like Todmorden and Rendelsham Forest. There's potential evidence of just general people just having a lot of UFO sightings during that year. And it's, that's weird. That's exciting. That's interesting. Let's look into it. And it's happened in other countries as well. Apparently in Belgium, there was another UFO wave that happened. I think it was about 1989. They had a similar incident. So that was roughly about 10 years later. So it just seems to happen in certain countries that will just have this huge gathering of pace in terms of UFO contact experiences. And yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of look into why that's actually happening. I'm also going to be looking at some information to do with Dolores Cannon, spoken about at length actually in various other podcasts. And yeah, it was just more about me and my own activity. Like, I've always had a propensity to wander around on my own. So I've lived in various cities around the world and always quite enjoy just kind of walking around, just soaking up the culture. I've always been a great walker. And, it's just not just urban environments. I do that as well. I've done it within rural environments. Always like to go for a walk like I did recently. I went to the Peak District, just walk around, absorb the surroundings. And, I remember reading one of Dolores Cannon's books and going back to her. She was a hypnotist, and she used to caress people to help heal them from various physical conditions or maybe mental conditions they were suffering. And then she obviously started to understand the reincarnation cycle, but the reincarnation cycle on Earth, there's a larger aspect to this where she was discovering that this reincarnation cycle is happening more galactically. So there are beings that are coming in from other planets or other potential dimensions that are then reincarnating on Earth for particular reasons, which I think is generally to help Earth go through this transition. People see at the moment Earth going this very tumultuous transition at the moment. This is why everything feels very crazy. And she defined these three waves of volunteers, basically. And yeah, and part of that, and one of the books that I read, she starts to talk about some people like aerials of energy, and they don't really have to do much. They don't have to have any big life plans, but all they have to do is to walk around and just affect the energy of the planet. So I started to consider maybe I'm part of that. I don't know, but it's just a theory. But I thought I'd talk about it on this audio space today. And then going really esoteric and then down the rabbit hole. You've probably been aware there's a lot of chatter, a lot of crazy theories to do with the up and coming solar eclipse, which is mainly going to affect the United States and Canada. And there seems to be lots of really strange activity going on. CERN has decided to turn itself on again, actually on the day of the solar eclipse. NASA's firing 3 rockets into the sky, and it's got some very strange occult names and symbology connected to this project. So that's interesting. But then it's just how the authorities have reacted to this. It just feels like doomsday scenario with states put on emergency footing, various states in America and Canada due to this. And then even more weirdly, there's these devil comets in the sky. And yeah, it's just a whole lot going on. I've generally sort of tried to listen to or read as much stuff as I could concerning this solar eclipse. A lot of it is a lot of big theories, a lot of crazy theories. Who knows is what's true, but it's always fun to kind of pick apart and look into it. And I think I'm probably going to record this podcast in 2 parts where, now I'm recording this the 7th of April on a Sunday. So the solar eclipse happens tomorrow. So I don't quite know what the results will be. So I'm going to talk about all the information I've researched so far. And then maybe after Monday at some point this week, I'll then jump back into the podcast and then discuss some of the after effects. And maybe we won't be here. Maybe, something crazy would have happened. But yeah, I mean, it's all mainly affecting the countries, the US and in Canada. I'm not sure in terms of if you live elsewhere in the world. I think maybe we get a partial eclipse in the UK. Yeah, but not on the sort of size that you're getting in the Americas. So yeah, that's generally what I'm going to be discussing on this podcast. Okay, so the first topic is in the Peak District. The Peak District is a national park, and I went for a walk in it on a Sunday, last Sunday to be exact. And yeah, for people who aren't in the UK, this Peak District National Park is basically in the north of England. It sort of vaguely looks like, if you look at the overall country of the United Kingdom, it vaguely looks in the middle, but is defined as being the north of England if you obviously discount Scotland. And is sandwiched, this whole national park area is sandwiched between Manchester and Sheffield, both very big. Well, not big. Yeah, they are big. Yeah, sort of largest cities, northern cities, quite industrial back in the day, during the industrial revolutions. These were big centers of industry, and obviously that a lot of that's changed, so there's been a big culture shift within those cities. But yeah, this national park is between both of those, and in terms of the typography and the nature aspect of it, it's very like moorland, very grassy, lots of sheep, some cattle, but it's very rolling, gentle hills. If I'm bringing some of my geography education during school, it's very old in terms of, you could see these big vast valleys, and in geographical terms, when I learned in geography, talk about glaciation, you get these big glaciers moving down these valleys, creating these valley spaces. And you can see it's quite old because they're very eroded down. It's not like Scotland where it's very craggy and the landscape's a little bit younger. This is a lot older because it's smoothed out. Erosion has happened, and yeah, the hills were a lot smoother. But it's still very, very breathtaking, lovely place to be. Incredibly busy. It was a bank holiday Monday, so there was just people everywhere. Yeah, so the next 5 minutes, it sounds like this is going to be a little bit of a tourism podcast, but I will bring in the weird and strange. Don't worry. So overall, the walk that I went on was around about 4 hours. I think it was about 8 miles in total, roughly. A couple of hours drive away from where I am, which is in Chester. And yeah, what happened is I sort of parked the car just slightly outside of like Castleton, which is the main town stroke village that's kind of nestled within the valley. And you get this like large hill ridge walk that kind of wraps around a couple of these towns, one being Castleton and the other being Hope. I think they're more classed as being villages, maybe large villages, I would guess, not really a town. And yeah, so I kind of parked my car and just started walking. And it was just, like I said, bank holiday. So it was just loads of people everywhere. I wasn't really expecting it to be that busy. And it was actually quite difficult to find somewhere to park. So that was the first challenge of the day. But yeah, the first hill that I walked up was called Mam Tor. And that's about 517 meters in height and 17,000 feet above sea level in old money. It did have an early Bronze Age fort and a couple of barracks. There is some kind of megalithic sites, but there's not a lot in that area, which kind of does suggest maybe there's not a huge amount in terms of earth energies. I mean, I don't take any dowsing rods or anything, but there's a few little like sites here and there, but there's nothing like in other areas. So yeah, I mean, I didn't feel anything energetic, but the elements were quite potent that day. It was really windy. There was just lots of people, so not a lot of time to really kind of sink in and sort of feel the landscape and feel the energy. It was more the visual spectacle of the day, really, for me. But as I was walking up to Mam Tor, I just randomly came across this cave, and it seemed that then I realised actually was quite a significant amount of caves in the area, which I hadn't really known before. So that was a complete surprise. And yeah, I worked up to the Mam Tor summit, and then you can carry on walking along the ridge, and you sort of come. I think they looked like other very strategic places because you had a good view all around of the surrounding area. You could see vast distances. It was really beautiful. Again, very, very windy. And I think there was about 3 or 4 different summits. I think the very last final one was probably the windiest. Yeah, it was quite intense, quite insane. But yeah, in terms of like the caverns, apparently they're perceived as being 4. I mean, I didn't really go in any of the caves. I have a slight weirdness to go in caves. I think maybe there was some I don't know, past life. Maybe I was trapped in an underground place. I don't know, but yeah, they do freak me out a little bit. I can feel a little bit claustrophobic. But yeah, overall there are apparently 4 caves or caverns. One's called Peak Cavern, another called Speedwell Cavern. There's Trek Cliff Cavern, and then the Blue John Mine Cavern. Uh, According to some of the research that I did, Peak Cavern is the only sort of natural one, and the locals call it as Devil's Arse, which I thought was quite funny. So yeah, they call it Devil's Arse. And all the other caverns, I think, generally were created through mining activity, which back in the day was a lot to do with mining lead. So that has pretty much stopped now. But there is still ongoing part-time mining for a stone I've never heard of before called Blue John. So that happens part-time. They still mine that particular mineral. They have various natural seams, apparently, that appear in the geology of the area. And again, I didn't go any of these caves. Maybe I'll go back sometime. But there's stalactites and stalagmites, and it does sound quite impressive. And I think in some of the caves they do things like concerts and outdoor cinema events as well. So yeah, that could be quite cool to go and check that out. But yeah, like I said, I sort of came across this random little cave as I was walking. I didn't quite know how deep it went, but yeah, just generally had a look around. It was quite cool. But yeah, overall, it was just a lovely brisk walk. It was good to stretch my legs. And then I took my new camera along as well that I've particularly bought for vlogging as well. And I very sort of sheepishly practiced with that at various points to see how it works. Yeah, so I got some footage I kind of took from that as well. So that was quite cool. I feel a little bit of a divvy because I don't generally like people sort of living their lives for a lens. I think people should experience the real world a lot of the time. So yeah, I feel like I don't know. I'm already crossing the line in terms of my own ethics, but hey ho. Yeah, so it was only till I returned back home, and then a few days after I started to kind of research a little bit into the area more and where I'd been. Because, like I said, it wasn't there specifically for content; it was just for a general walk and stretching my. And I felt it was one of those things, especially if you're working loads in the computer, to go out there and then you just feel so much more refreshed. And the wind was so strong and heavy that it just really blasted away the cobwebs. Yeah, it was quite spectacular, and it was quite lucky the weather wasn't like sunny, but it was very windy. But yeah, there were sunny spots here and there, but it was just a nice, diverse walk, along the hills and then through some farmland, and then you walk through this small village, and then alongside this river, through various fields. I thought I did find a long barrow, but some research looks like maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a random mound of stuff with kind of trees on top. But yeah, I mean, it was only when I came back I started to research. I noticed a big castle on the opposite side of the ridge, which I didn't go to. It's called Peveril Castle, and that was built in 1176. And the sort of some of the strange information that came about that it's generally, people see apparitions, and it's potentially haunted by white knights and jousting matches. And they used to have these big popular jousting matches there, and knights would travel from all over the land to kind of fight in these jousting events. Because apparently the guy who built this castle had 2 daughters, and one of the daughters was to be married off, but it was actually through jousting events that a hand in marriage was to be gained by these kind of very testosterone filled manly knights who were looking for a fair maiden to wed. So lots of ghosts to do with knights that happen at this castle, but then also some reports of very ethereal female singing has been reported around there as well. And I'm generally looking at the area, I'm quite surprised actually there isn't more strangers because of all the caves. I thought there might be quite a lot of stories to do some of these caves, but I couldn't really find much at all. But one really random bit of information I'd never come across before was more like quite a cult in nature and a little bit grim and disgusting, if I'm being honest. Yeah, I started to become aware of a thing called the Hand of Glory that was found in a cottage walls in the Castleton village. And I found an article to do with this on the Mysterious Universe website. I'll put the link in the description. I think this one's behind a paywall, so yeah, you'd have to pay for a subscription to kind of view this article. But it goes into details concerning this mummified hand, which came from a condemned criminal. And people would basically take these hands from criminals, and they thought they had, really powerful occult powers. And there was quite a number of years ago, I went to a talk. I can't remember the name of the event now, but I went to a talk in London, and there's a real mishmash of different speakers there, people talking about straight track lines, fairy death paths, and general earth energies. But there was a lot of talk to do with people burying these very strange objects in the structures of buildings, and a lot to do with dead cats. Apparently, they used to bury, cats were buried alive in the structures of buildings as a good luck charm or to ward off evil spirits, or they even sacrificed cats when foundations were laid as well, again for good fortune for the building. So there's a long history in this country back in the day of like putting strange objects and animals that are buried in the construction of these buildings. These severed hands, these hands of glory, is the strangest one I've heard about. And again, it's pretty grisly, a pretty mad story. And then, yeah, it's all part of this occult traditions, these folklores. And this happened around the 1600s, roughly. And, some of the information of these articles talks about how the disembodied left hand would be from a hand criminal, or it could be from a right hand, which tended to be from a criminal who was a murderer. And yeah, so it depended on what they did to find which hand was taken. But then the sort of the process to mummify these objects was pretty disgusting. The hand was drained, it was dried, it was pickled, and then a candle was made from the rendered fat. And they actually detailed one of the recipes for creating this hand of glory from an occult grimoire from 1722 called Petit Albert. And this is how it goes. This is a quote from that article. It goes, I warn you, this has got a lot of old school terminology in it, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. So apologies, it's going to sound weird, but I'll do my best. Take the right or the left hand of a felon who is hanging from a gibbet beside a highway. Wrap it in part of a funeral pall, and so wrapped, squeeze it well. Then put it in an earthenware vessel with zamit, nitir, salt, and long peppers, the whole well powdered. Leave it in this vessel for a fortnight, then take it out and expose it to the full sunlight during the dog days until it becomes quite dry. If the sun is not strong enough, put it in an oven with fern and vervain. Next, make a kind of candle from the fat of the gibleted felon, virgin wax, sesame, and pony, and use the hand of glory as a candlestick to hold this candle when lighted. And then those in every place into which you go with this bendful instrument shall remain motionless. The hand of glory that was actually found in Castleton by a local stonemason donated it to Whitby Museum in 1935. I have no idea why, but it's what it says in the article. But apparently as part of this museum exhibit where it has the hand of glory, it has this extract, this text, this written extract explaining how they make the hand of glory. So this is another way. The hand must be cut from the body of a criminal on the gibbet, pickled in salt and the urine of a man, woman, dog, horse, and mare, smoked with herbs and hay for a month, hung on an oak tree for 3 nights running, then laid at a crossroads, then hung on a church door for 1 night, while the maker keeps watch in the porch. And if it be that no fear hath driven you forth from the porch, then the hand be true one, and it be yours. Yeah, so this recipe is even more intense. The urine of a man, woman, dog, horse, and mare. Yeah, that's a lot of we. Yeah, so that was what's written in the Whitby Museum. And generally, I think there were common examples of they were used as candles. It was either the hand itself was holding a candle, or the fingers themselves, because of the rendered fat, were actually used as a candle. And, they were perceived to have these really mad, kind of powerful occult power. And they could, some perceived it to be able to open any unlocked door. It would create invisibility, so the user would be invisible to people around them. And again, like we said before, it could paralyze everyone around you as well, or put them to sleep. So it could be used during a robbery potentially. So yeah, pretty grim stuff. But yeah, all the same, pretty fascinating as well. apparently says that the Hand of Glory may have stemmed from the myth of the mandrake root, which kind of makes me think of Harry Potter. But apparently the leaves and the roots sort of do appear to be like a human hand. This is like a mythical plant. But yeah, they're making that connection between the Hand of Glory and this mythical plant. So that's the Hand of Glory. Yeah, moving on now to my ideas, my maybe shift in focus potentially towards potentially vlogging and just being outside. These last few weeks have sort of been quite good. I've had some time off from my normal day job as a designer, so I've really been trying to ramp up the Reconsider Simon content. There's been a lot of general admin going on in my life as well, moving various bits and bobs into storage as well. So that's kind of been going on. But yeah, so it's just I'm just trying to really revisualize what my life should be now. And I am getting really quite bored of being behind a computer and being at a screen all the time. It's so difficult because so much of our modern life is constructed around screens, whether it's computers or phones, and then particularly because I think I've had such a long period of ill health as well. I've just meant my screen times has been even bigger than usual. Just because I haven't been able to exercise, going outside has been difficult. So, I mean, what do you do? There was times when I couldn't really have the concentration to read or do anything else apart from just sort of stare at a screen. So yeah, I was just watching a lot of stuff all the time. And now health is a lot better. Still not 100%, but it's definitely getting there. I've been working a lot more as well. And then still not as good a health that I can start kind of exercising and doing all the stuff I was doing before. So again, in the evenings I was tending to watch stuff, whether my computer or like my projector I have, just zoning out to watch a film or series, etc. So yeah, I'm really trying to like reduce the amount of screen time hours, which is happening. I'm starting to get back into stuff like I quite enjoyed windsurfing. I did that again this week, which was cool. So yeah, hopefully that sort of activity will ramp up and that will reduce the amount of things that I'm watching and things. And yeah, and it's just generally like being behind a screen all day, every day. I'm just feeling less and less inspired by it. You say, what can I do? Obviously I have to earn money somehow. Is there any way of me getting around this? And it's a wild shot, but that potential of maybe just taking a camera and then doing this sort of thing like on the move, going to interesting places, filming it, and then talking about it while I'm actually there. And then, I love going to new places. And because I've been so hemmed in for so long, I was always, generally was quite up for traveling to different countries or different locations, going for walks in different areas before. So now my health has kind of come back and kind of do that. And it's a good opportunity that maybe I can kind of veer into vlogging in some way. So yeah, I've started to buy the equipment for that and just going to see how that goes. And one of the first places I do want to go to, properly to make a video would be Rendalsham Forest. And I started to do some work with Pendulum in terms of map dowsing and the areas I should go to, and some quite fascinating information came up as well. So that's going to be quite cool. So maybe I can weave other locations in as I go to Rendlesham Forest. So yeah, there's some various problems on my car I've got to sort out before I can do this. But yeah, hopefully quite soon I will be doing that. On a side note, I mean, this is a little bit of a detour from what I'm talking about, but I've been watching this Steve Martin, the comedian, the American comedian. And there's a documentary of him on Apple TV. And, he's a real, like, in terms of when I was born, born in the 1980s, I'm a real child of the 1980s and 90s. And for me, he was always in films. He was in Trains, Planes and Automobiles, and a film called Parenthood, Little Shop of Horrors. He's hilarious, quite sadistic dentist in that. Really funny. So yeah, I've been watching this documentaries in two parts, and the first part is a lot to do with his stand-up, and he was doing this stand-up for like 15 years. And a lot of the stuff when he was doing his really surreal take, he was quite into philosophy, and he was about deconstructing performance, like what is it, and start to make it quite absurd. But a lot of ways, depending where he was in the United States when he was doing these tours, people just didn't understand what the comedy was. And him himself, I think it took him a long time to kind of find his feet within it. And it took him about 10 to 15 years to actually get some sort of success. Uh, and I think he was like really forging a path into this new area of comedy that hadn't really been done before, which is sort of strange performance, quite surreal, quite absurdist. And, the people weren't ready for that. He wasn't ready for that, and he was still trying to figure it all out. And so I'm not calling myself Steve Martin in any way, shape, or form, because I'm blatantly not. But yeah, it is this new thing that I'm trying to do, and just obviously the confidence levels in terms of talking in front of a camera, not feeling a bit of a divvy when you're outside, there's other people there. So it was all these things, and just getting over that and finding the confidence to do this new thing, and it is, yeah, it's a fear thing, isn't it, really? It's a fear thing of like what people might think. It's a fear like, what the hell am I doing? This is wild. Uh, yeah. So it's all these emotions, but at the same time, yeah, it feels like I'm being pushed in that direction. So I'm just going to go with it. Maybe it'll come to a big nothing burger, but I've got to at least try, I guess. And it just goes to show, it took him years and years to really find his feet in these things, but he just kept at it. And generally in life, I've seen, this happens for people. It can take them years and years, but you just got to keep chipping away, keep going, keep going. And at some point, you'll have a breakthrough. So yeah, we'll see. Watch the space. But yeah, lots of exciting planning to do concerning that. And yeah, like I was talking about, the Rendlesham Forest incident. I mean, there's so much content to do with this on the internet. It's such a huge topic in terms of so many researchers have dug into this. But yeah, I got fascinated by the idea. I saw that connection immediately between the Rendlesham Forest happening in the 1980s, and then also the Todmorden podcast that I did recently as well. There were such big events because you had these really close quarters experiences. And in terms of Todmorden, you had this policeman that was blatantly, abducted onto this craft. And what I discovered later, actually, in the last podcast, I was talking about how he was aware of small little beings and then a larger being with a beard. But what I hadn't heard before, I read in sort of an article recently, which I didn't get a chance to put in the podcast before, was that there was a weird black dog on this craft as well. And I think after that, or even before that, he'd had a lot of experiences with these big black hounds. So that's really weird. So yeah, the Todmorden stories, a lot to do with the earth energies and potential occult activity there, Freemasonry. And then the Rendlesham Forest one is slightly different in the fact that I'm not doubting maybe there are ley lines there, but it seems a lot tied up with the military activity and the potential. This US Army base, I think it's RAF Brentwaters, was basically housing like nuclear weapons as well. And then UFOs tend to be gravitated for some reason towards nuclear weapons. This seems to be repeated throughout the decades. They seem to appear at nuclear silos, but also during nuclear testing, they're there as well. During warfare, the UFOs are there as well. So there's a real connection between these two elements. Both of these incidents, Todmorden and Rendlesham, happened in 1980 specifically. And this is when I was born. There's a lot of strange numerology with my birth, which I always find quite interesting. I was born the 7th day of the 7th month. And according to my mum, I weighed 7 pounds, 7 ounces. Obviously, it only works in metric, so I don't know what that is in kilograms. But yeah, all strange. And 7's always been a quite important number for me as well. So it's always very much been part of my life. So that's cool. But yeah, I just was doing a little bit of research on the internet, as you do. And I found an article from this website I'd never seen before called Alienated Media. And he actually had an article specifically titled The 1980s UFO Waves, UK's Year of the Alien. I have to say before I start with this is that I'm not sure where this person is getting some of this data. And I do get an AI feel for this website as a whole. A lot of the imagery is AI, so I wouldn't be surprised that some of the information in terms of like the articles themselves would have been composed by AI. It has that feeling to it. I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. I'll leave a link in the description for you to look for yourself. But in this article, it claims that the press called 1980 the year of the alien. I couldn't really find any information to back that up. I had a good old search on the internet to find anything to sort of indicate that was true. But it does seem there's a lot of sightings. They quote in this article hundreds of recorded sightings happening every single month throughout that year across the United Kingdom. So it's not just the Todmorden and the Rendlesham Forest, which are big events because, again, they're such close contact. But overall sightings for UFOs seem to be going through the roof that particular year. And why is that happening? Why the UK at that particular point is becoming such a hotspot? So again, the UFOs really are drawn towards nuclear activity, military activity in general. And yeah, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that some of the interaction UFOs are actually deactivating some of these nuclear bombs. And to me, that sort of plays a clear message, do not mess with this technology. But being crazy humans, obviously, we don't seem to listen. But I did uncover this article, which talks a lot to do with Rendlesham Forest and this nuclear component to it. And yeah, it was written in the UK's Express newspaper, and this is 2016, and the title was Rendlesham UFO: Aliens that visited RAF base after nuclear weapons, says ex-cop. So as the article explains, Gary Heseltine used to be part of the RAF, the Royal Air Force here in the United Kingdom. And he was involved within policing, and that's more specifically protecting and guarding nuclear weapons themselves. And upon his retirement from the military, it seems that he became a UFO researcher. I'm not sure whether that's like full-time or maybe more of a part-time thing. But I have a quote from the newspaper article which goes as follows. Mr. Heseltine says new research has been uncovered the fact that there is a huge stash of nuclear armaments stored at RAF Bentwaters at the time of the mass sightings. Theories about the case have re-exploded since a special conference to mark the 35-year anniversary held in the area last July. Then top speaker of Rendalsham witness Colonel Charles Holt, who was deputy base commander at the time, revealed details of a new radar evidence. Mr. Heseltine, a British transport police officer for 24 years before becoming a UFO sleuth, said Mr. Holt had revealed to him about the Suffolk Air Base holding the largest nuclear weapons arsenal in Europe. He said, Colonel Holt told me RAF Bentwaters had more nuclear missiles in the weapons storage area, WSA, than anywhere else in Europe. In his account of the sighting, Colonel Holt said the UFO had fired beams of light into the weapons storage area of the base. Mr. Heseltine said Colonel Holt made admission during a visit to the base. So that is the end of the extract. And yeah, it just goes on to show what I just said. Yeah, there's a long history of UFOs deactivating nuclear bombs, interfering with them, viewing the facilities. This seems to happen in other countries as well. They have similar waves of UFO activity. Belgium, again, had their own wave of UFO sightings, and this was a lot to do with military activity as well. And then bringing in the Afghan and Russia conflict, which was happening during the 1980s. I'd just been born, so I wasn't really aware too much about this conflict, really. But it has a lot of parallels, strangely, with today. This is back during the Cold War, and essentially Afghan forces were being used as proxy armies by Western governments to fight against Russia. And again, it depends on what geopolitical position you have, but I do feel that maybe Ukraine is being used as a proxy army, and a lot of Western governments are funding it with weaponry and funds in general to fight against Russia. But overall, it is a fight, between Russia and the West, as it was with Afghanistan. And again, more controversially, I would say that is continuing on with ISIS. And there was a recent attack in Moscow. I would say there's a lot of connections between this force and security services of Western governments. And again, you could perceive that the West potentially attacking Moscow. It's a controversial opinion, but that's the opinion I have. But, that's another rabbit hole. So staying on topic, UFOs, there was an extract from the US State Department documentation because they were starting to have a lot of UFO sightings, UFO experiences that were happening while this conflict in Afghanistan was going on. And the extract goes like this. Accounts have in common the brightness of the lights, the distances from which they are discernible, the size of the areas they appear to illuminate, more, perhaps much more than 5 miles in diameter. Accounts differ in that some speak of a narrow beams, which are compared with laser or searchlights as part of the phenomenon. Most, though, speak of more diffused illumination. Accounts differ as to whether lights slowly wax and wane or reach maximum intensity and turn off instantly. There were many at the time, they were actually perceiving some of these lights, these experiences being sophisticated Russian weaponry. I mean, you obviously can't completely rule that out. Uh, but there was a lot of officials that did think, Russia doesn't have that type of capability, and they did sort of start to lean towards more worldly interactions. And as a whole, conflict seems to create UFO sightings as a real big draw for this U activity. And it's stretched back. I mean, I don't know, but I know it's well documented. There's a lot of sightings during World War II, where you had a lot of aircraft in the skies. You have these dogfights, these huge air battles between Germany, America, Britain. And this whole concept, they called them Foo Fighters. Obviously, the band Foo Fighters, and the name originated from what they would see as UFOs in the sky. They called them Foo Fighters. So there's a real connection between major conflicts in this sort of activity. And I've also seen some video evidence and also read stuff to do with the Ukraine conflict as well. And there's one article talking about how Ukrainian soldiers actually captured a disc-like craft using some of the drone surveillance technology. And I've seen the video, you can see this disc shape just hovering in the sky above the battlefield. But going back to the 1980s, well, just in general, back in the day, even stretching back, 50s, 60s, people were having these really close quarters experiences as individuals of UFO craft or even beings. And for some reason, that just doesn't seem to occur these days. People are having interactions. I myself have had them, but they're at a distance, they're quite high in the sky. You got to think what's changed. And the conclusion maybe I've come to is that maybe certain covert forces now have the technology to interfere with these craft or even shoot them down. So maybe this is why they're keeping at such a distance, because now it's actually quite dangerous for them. So I'm just speculating here, but this is maybe why these craft are staying so far away in the sky, due to this danger of maybe being shot out of the sky from this reality for some particular reason. But the interaction with humanity has changed in the fact that people having these more distant connections to these craft. I mean, abductions still seem to be happening, but these craft still seem to be quite high in the sky. There's not abductions like in the Todmorden where actually the craft is quite close up. So that's about all I have for the 1980s UK UFO wave. Yes, now we're going to go look at the sun and the moon together, because they are going to be forming an eclipse soon in the United States and Canada. And I'm going to record again these in two parts. I'm going to talk about, which is now Sunday, 7th of April, about some of the theories that are flying around to do this event. And there's a lot of them. I'm coming that are quite crazy, quite out there. And yeah, and then I'm going to record again after the eclipse itself. Hopefully we're all still here. If we're not here, hopefully we're somewhere good. That's what I hope. But yeah, so let's fingers crossed for a positive result for whatever happens. Maybe nothing happens. So even though the eclipse doesn't really happen until Monday, the 8th of April, 2024, it feels like the energy's been really building up. Something palpable is kind of happening. And someone I know finally posted on Facebook, and they were saying that they've got some of the wildest end times rhetoric they've heard since 2012, which I have to take their word for, because actually I wasn't really awake during that time. I think I was vaguely aware of like ideas to do with Mayan calendar and that sort of not happening the way people thought it would be. But yeah, apparently this is just a lot of end times chatter that are happening quite similar to the 2012 event. But the bare bones to this whole situation is that there's going to be a solar eclipse, and it's going to cross certain areas within the USA and Canada. And behind the scenes, in terms of energy, spiritually, there's probably a lot going on. Lots of mystical reasons, lots of energy shifts that happen with this eclipse. But it does appear that solar eclipse in a lot of cultures actually perceived as being quite a bad omen. I guess maybe it's something to do with the loss of light. The darkness can feel quite scary. But there seems to be a lot of indications, connections between eclipses and leadership, leadership of countries, royalty, etc. And it can put everything in disarray to the powers that be or the powers that are. And yeah, I find that there's a lot of correlation with the current situation with the UK royal family. None of them really are doing any engagements, and it just made me think maybe there's a connection between the solar eclipse and the royal family, how they've all just dropped out. Obviously, there's all these various reasons. A lot of them have got cancer, which is suspect in itself. Um, yeah, so it might be something to do with solar eclipse. Although, as I said, majority of this eclipse is happening USA and Canada, but I think to a degree we'll be able to see a part of it, partial eclipse, in the UK. But what about the major mechanics actually happening during this event? What's happening, bare bones, is the moon is crossing the path of the sun. Now, the moon, for me, is a very, very strange entity. I think it holds a lot of mystery, a lot of very crazy out there theories. And the fact that for this solar eclipse to work, the moon is actually specifically 400 times smaller than the sun, right? Which is very accurate, specific maths that's going on here for this solar eclipse to occur. And then it's 400, the moon is it's 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun. That's the moon. So it's really wild that you're getting these very whole numbers to do with this solar eclipse. And for this to happen naturally, to have this object to be captured within the Earth's orbit, completely naturally, and just by chance, it's 400 times smaller than the sun and 400 times closer to the Earth, is crazy if you really think about it and write these dimensions. And there's a lot more craziness to do with the moon in terms of, the geometry of it and, potentially what it's made of. Maybe I'll do a podcast or a video about that in the future. But yeah, the moon as a whole is very strange. So because the moon perfectly covers, like literally perfectly covers the sun, it creates this, ring of fire effect around it. And it's potentially quite dangerous to look at. It can burn the sort of the corneas of your eyes. But some of the reasons why, this particular solar eclipse is really fueling the fires of conspiracy, it's a lot to do with the activity of like what some of these American institutions are doing, and also what the government are doing, how they're reacting to it, which is kind of creating this big conspiracy around it. And multiple states within the USA and Canada have actually declared states of emergencies and actually deemed that delivery lorries or trucks have been forbidden in certain areas from driving on the road during this particular time. And then also they've deployed the National Guard. And some think this is due to the fact that, sheer number of people, visitors who are expected to go along the route of this solar eclipse are going to want to see this. So, some people perceive the National Guard being there to mitigate that in terms of crowd control. But there's a lot of precedent when solar eclipses happen for multiple earthquakes to occur. And there's been numerous earthquakes have been happening already. So that is a potential, this energy that's kind of coming in, this eclipse energy that's coming to the Earth could destabilize the tectonic plates and start to create earthquakes. So that's a real worry. But I was mining for theories and interesting ideas on Twitter. Well, no, it's called X now. I still call it Twitter. But yeah, like I said, there's so many different theories. Some of the more crazy ones I've sort of picked out for you. I was looking at the path. Someone's detailed a map. There's a path of the 2017 solar eclipse, and overlaid the 2024, the one that's going to happen tomorrow, over the top, and it creates this X over the country of the USA and Canada. And that X is a very mysterious number and seems to appear everywhere at the moment. In terms of 2017, I vaguely remember this eclipse happening, and I think we would have had actual full total solar eclipse, but because it was so cloudy, as it always is in the UK, you couldn't really see anything. There was no real visual spectacle to kind of real look at. But yeah, going back to this X path that's drawn from the 2017 and 2024, again, this kind of relates to the idea of X marking the spot. And, the X marking the spot actually is in Texas. And there's a lot of strangeness with X, again, with Elon Musk. He calls all of his companies, always has an X element to it, the SpaceX. And as I said, Twitter is now called X. And he does come from this very privileged background. There's a lot of strangeness to do with his family. He's from these potential bloodline ruling families, and maybe he has more occult knowledge than he lets on. And I would say the X aspect is a big giveaway. And, you get things like the X-Men. I've got an iPhone X, and, WHO recently were talking about disease X. So there's just so many X's around, and he even kind of infiltrates music as well. There's this a young rapper in America called Little Nas X, and he's quite controversial because of a lot of his songs and his iconography in his videos, his music videos. It's very occult, has a lot of demonic iconography. And a lot of people saying, oh, yeah, he's just playing with those sort of imagery. But, there's definitely feels like there's something to this. He's really pushing an agenda. Maybe he's unwittingly pushing it, but definitely there's an agenda behind him. Focusing on the letter X, you're looking at sort of occult secret societies. There's this idea that a lot of them are trying to usher in this Aeon of Horus. And this reenactment story is to do with Osiris and is very much symbolized by the letter X. And a lot of you will know about we're kind of coming out of this age astrologically, the age of Pisces, which is perceived being very dark, very heavy. If you look in history, it's had a lot of violence and a lot of suppression overall. And now we're moving into this lighter time of Aquarius where everyone's consciousness is raising. And then hopefully we're going to go through a golden era or building up to a golden era of humanity. But there is this worry that particular forces, they don't want to lose control of humanity. They want to keep this grip of control. So they're trying to subvert this age of Aquarius again within their own image. And it's all about ushering in this Aeon of Horus as they see it. So we've got this letter X. We get some of this occult religious views that some of these bloodline families or these covert controllers potentially have. And then you look at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider. And then apparently they've been shut off for a while now, I think, and they're firing up during this eclipse, which is crazy. And there's a real connection. I was listening to this video about CERN has actually traded scientists with the Vatican. And the Vatican, in my view, is not just about Catholicism and Christianity. There's something deeper and darker going on there, unfortunately. But CERN itself, they've always been trying to look for the God particle. And if you bring in like the Vatican into the mix as well, it's very weird. They actually have a telescope called Lucifer. So there's that. But overall, during the eclipse, you have a real reduction in light. And even more bizarrely, people are saying that this thing called the Devil's Comet, which should be visible because the light is a lot lower, you should be able to see this thing called the Devil's Comet. And because it has two tails on the back of the comet, people perceive it as being horns. So there's just so much craziness going on to do with this solar eclipse. It's just untrue. And then where did I speak about it? But yeah, I was talking about, I think, the red heifers, maybe on the last podcast, maybe, I can't remember. But yeah, anyway, in Israel, obviously, it's a hotbed of conflict at the moment between Gaza and Israel. And in Israel, there's certain sects of Israel, but also Christians as well, who want to bring back Christ, the second coming of Christ. But others perceive it actually being the coming back of the Antichrist. And they're doing this elaborate ceremony involving red heifers, these red cows, and they can't have a single blemished hair on these cows. They've been genetically engineered for this. And they have to be sacrificed, in view of this temple on the mound, which again is controversial in itself because this is a very sacred site for Islam. And the idea is they want to build this new temple on the mound, again, to fulfill this prophecy. So there's potentiality that during this solar eclipse, the sacrifice of these red heifers are going to happen as well to help elicit the Christ or Antichrist, depending on what religious view you're taking. So that's happening as well. And then to top all that, you have NASA, not really a space agency, who are launching 3 rockets at 45-minute intervals as the sun eclipses. Now, the mainstream reason, the scientific reason they give is to measure changes in the ionosphere, which makes common sense, but the name to the project itself is very occult-like. It's called APEC, and this all relates to an ancient Egyptian spirit of evil and darkness, and this spirit was the arch enemy of the sun god Ra, represented by the sun, and it was perceived as being a very malevolent force. So every night the sun would travel through the underworld, and this APEC, the roar of this APEC would fill the air as he launched an attack on the sun god. And it is, if you look at the symbology of it, it's very phallic objects of these kind of rockets piercing this egg. So it's all very strange, very occult. Some people have theorized, that I've read on Twitter, that these explosions in the ionosphere with these rockets are trying to shift Earth into a different timeline. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but it's interesting to ponder on. But yeah, there definitely is a very occult, and they're not even really hiding it in terms of the names of it. So it adds a huge suspicion around it already, and just fuels this idea of moving from the age of Pisces into Aquarius and different timelines. Yeah, it's wild. And on that topic of timelines and potential portals into new timelines or existences, I was talking about CERN. If you hark back to there's some early videos of CERN with these strange ritualistic activities happening. Outside of the CERN facility, they have the Shiva, which is the goddess of destruction, which is strange in itself. But there was this found footage of these cloaked individuals having this kind of mock human sacrifice in front of this deity. Um, CERN perceived this as being a joke. They released the video as a joke, but yeah, it just fuels a conspiracy around everything. And then if you look at CERN itself, the logo just have multiple sixes, 666 in the logo, again adds more suspicion to it. And the whole narrative that you're fed about CERN is that they're looking for invisible matter. They're looking for the God particle, the powers of the universe. But some think they're actually working on something more than that. They're actually trying to open portals. And, maybe there's two aspects. Maybe there are mainstream scientists that think they're on this very benign project that's doing this very deep research. Maybe there's a certain section of the scientists actually the true understanding of what this apparatus is for. But me, myself, I was living with this one girl just as a flatmate. She had a brother, and I know he worked at CERN. He seemed like a very nice guy. He was quite young, so maybe he wasn't read in at certain particular levels. I don't know how long he was working at CERN for, but he didn't seem particularly strange or like quite into the occult. So yeah, maybe that is true. Maybe there are two sides to it. Maybe there's more of a secret covert that only certain echelons within the scientific hierarchy know about. But overall, this solar eclipse event, two of the big narratives in terms of conspiratorial occult narratives, is maybe in some way they're trying to push the Earth or humanity onto a particular timeline, or maybe it's a big ceremony ushering in this new, what they see as the age of Horus. I don't know. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And it could be one of those sort of things that visually nothing really happens, but maybe everything's kind of in the energy. Maybe there's a huge shift energy wise and we're just not aware of it. But yeah, I mean, the speculation is just quite incredible, the amount of theories on the internet. And yeah, it's really good fun to read some of them. So that kind of wraps up the theory and sort of speculation side of that. I will now transport into the future to future Simon, and I will talk about actually what happened. So over to you, Simon. Boy. Hello, this is future Simon here, coming to you live from Tuesday, the 9th of April 2024. It's 10 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. And nothing happened. I'm still here. I hope you're still there. In terms of the weather's gone a bit nuts. So looking out the window, it's very wet and windy. So maybe energetically, things have been stirred up a bit. In terms of the actual eclipse itself, I didn't really see the point of going outside. It was very cloudy, and plus being in the United Kingdom, I think we're only going to get a very partial eclipse anyway. So I took the opportunity to meditate and just kind of drop into a mass meditation for general global peace. Just set the intention to try and counteract some of the weirdness going on. Did that basically. Afterwards, I did feel a little bit of anxiety, so I felt, even though I did try and layer on the protection as much as possible, I felt there was a little bit of attack going on, but nothing too, desperate. Overall, slept pretty well. So yeah, nothing to report as yet. Generally this morning, as I was drinking my cup of tea, I was on Twitter, and I was just generally, scrolling through the various content and videos, just trying to find anything that went on, like during the eclipse, if there's anything that kind of stood out or looked interesting. Overall, there's just a lot of very cool videos concerning people watching the eclipse. Some pretty potent ones. Obviously, they're in sunlight, and then a few minutes later, then everything's descending into darkness, and some really beautiful videos and photography of the whole ring of fire and the moon sort of moving into place directly over the sun. yeah, so that was kind of quite nice to kind of dip in and take a look at. Overall, in terms of like NASA's activity, it looks like they fired off the rockets as planned. Couldn't really find anything else to do with that. And then CERN, obviously, I think was turned on, and we haven't been descended into some wormhole into a different dimension. Well, that's what I think anyway. So I think everything as it was. But yeah, this kind of. I was actually on Facebook the other day, and it was like a friend of a friend, and he claimed that he sat down with an actual, mainstream physicist who worked at CERN, and this guy, according to him, just asked, point blank, "Are you trying to open portals at CERN?" And the answer that he got, that at CERN they weren't, but other facilities they are, which I thought was interesting. It's only coming from a friend of a friend. I don't know this individual at all, so no way of verifying that at all. But I had seen a previous video a while ago that a Hadron Collider was actually a smaller version of the CERN facility, which is based in Switzerland. There's another one in Oak Ridge in Tennessee. And there was this crazy video, and it gave a location in this CERN facility. And there was just very localized lightning and thunder and very cloudy activity around this facility. There was a person who was filming it. They were a distance away from this collider, and yeah, they were just filming what was going on. They're going, yeah, look, they're messing around with portals. So maybe there is something in that, and it makes a lot of sense. Why you potentially would open this large CERN Hadron Collider. Maybe this gets all the controversy, but actually, sort of other facilities dotted around the world are doing the more freaky stuff. So they're more kind of hidden in plain sight. Yeah, it's an interesting theory to consider anyway. In some of the imagery that I saw photos, there was some very pronounced solar flare activity that seemed to be occurring, particularly on the Ring of Fire, as the moon went in front of the sun. And yeah, it made me think actually, when you have this alignment of the Earth and the moon all in a row, and then whether the combined magnetic fields of these two bodies, the Earth and moon, whether that interacts somehow with the sun's magnetic field, and whether it actually can flare up and make it even more energetic. So yeah, I was just kind of considering maybe that as a possibility. But overall, also, there seemed to be a little bit of an uptick on people claiming UFO sightings. And I think there's some content on TikTok that people have been talking about. There's one particular video that sticks out quite a lot, and it's I'll play a clip of it in a minute, but essentially just shows a really blue sky. So it's either before or after the solar eclipse leading up to it. There's a slight bit of cloud cover, and this very thin disc-like craft just glides through the air and then gently disappears. It's more the kind of the crowd's reaction is the kind of the hilarious aspect to this video. Obviously, you can't see because I'll be in a podcast, but I will try and leave a link in the description so you can see it. But yeah, I'll play it for you now. Hello, sorry. Just before I get to the clip, I'm just recording this on a terrible microphone as I edit this. I didn't realise, I completely forgot to mention the fact that this has a lot of swearing in it. So if you have any small children, cover their ears, or if you are offended by bad language, then I suggest maybe skipping the next 15 seconds. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Bruh.
Look, there's something flying through the air. What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?
Yo, what the fuck?
Aliens!
Yo.
So there you go. That's the clip. Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. There's a guy in the background. It's aliens! It's aliens! And I think if I was in that same location, that situation, it'd probably be me saying exactly the same thing.
Aliens!
Which is quite funny. But yeah, that video was apparently filmed in Arlington, Texas. And Texas is a huge area for totality of the solar eclipse. So, you in certain areas of Texas, I think you were getting complete 100% cover of the moon over the sun. So it would have been a real spectacle. But yeah, that video I thought was pretty interesting. In reference to this video, there's a Twitter account called a Cab. I think it's pronounced K-A-B. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I always generally read some of their posts. They can be quite interesting. But this individual guy claims that he has some form of telepathic communication with his mother called Judah, who he claims is a seventh dimensional, all part of a seventh dimensional Palladian soul family. And yeah, he sort of posts a lot of stuff to do with UFO activity and general global events and things. Like he has some exterior knowledge from some of these forces. Again, I have no idea whether this information is true, but again, it's interesting to kind of consider and think upon. And yeah, and in his post, he writes this. This is a small Palladian craft that has 3 occupants. They are enjoying the excitement of the eclipse as they observe. The craft will enter the mothership with 20 other craft of this fleet. Again, I've no idea whether this is true information or not, but yeah, it's quite interesting if it is. This idea of like Palladian craft in the skies does correlate with some of my own experiences. You know, I mentioned this before on I think a video. There was a period of time number of years ago when I was just having a lot of interaction with craft in the sky, things flashing at me, and just a lot of telepathic nudges to sort of look up. Now I would sort of see stuff in the sky, and that hasn't happened for a long time. But when I was using divination, like using a pendulum, trying to explore what these things were, what was I seeing, and I was actually getting a lot of the time that they were Palladian. I was asking some of the time, you know, what particular races they are, and that I would always get Palladian for the majority of the time. And again, through my own investigations, rudimentary investigations through, you know, pendulum usage, not always totally accurate, but, you know, it's a good guide. I always consider it to be quite a good guide. And then obviously I've had various readings from people that have potential, you know, talents that can foresee maybe where your soul has traveled through this, you know, through the galactic area, through galactic space. And then Palladian has never really come up for me, but it always seemed strange that I was sort of seeing Palladian craft. So, and that was again through pendulum usage, I was getting this information. So, take or leave that information if you want. I know there is certain information out there that sort of claims that Palladians aren't potentially great or beneficial towards humanity. I don't have access to this sort of awareness, so I can't confirm or deny this. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just a lot of this information that we're receiving in terms of about different races coming through potential channeled information or dream experiences or, you know, past lives potentially. So it's quite hard to get a very, very clear picture how everything fits together. But yeah, interesting all the same. I'm sure over the next few days and weeks, more videos will start to surface in terms of maybe high strangers and UFOs that occurred over the solar eclipse. We'll have to see. A lot of them seem to be coming from TikTok. And that kind of reminds me, actually, there was a story that came up concerning the solar eclipse on TikTok that I sort of saw after recording majority of the podcast. And I thought it was quite cool, quite funny, quite out there. But it was on a TikTok channel called Conscious Sean. And he made a really well connection between the idea of reptilians and dragons and bells, frequencies and the moon. And a lot of this stems from a really bizarre article that was actually written by NBC News, so that's in America. And it was a news article released on the 22nd of March, 2024, this year. And it discusses a rare disorder causes a man to see people's faces as demonic. Now, this guy, his name was Shara, and he was around about 59 years old, and he came from Clarksville, Tennessee. And he started to see randomly people with demonic faces. He would see very elongated eyes, pointy ears, sort of very big grins, and various textual features on the skin change that start to look very, you know, reptilian, start to look very demonic-like. And the mainstream science is basically claiming this is I can't even begin to pronounce the name of this neurological condition because I'll butcher it, but they've got a very shortened down version which is called PMO, so I refer to it as PMO. But this condition really sort of kicked into gear for him in November in 2020, and when it happened he thought he'd woken up in a demon world because he was just sort of seeing all these faces as demonic. And it was just the interesting timing for people because this came up a lot, and people were theorizing like why they're releasing this article now. Is something going to happen, like in terms of like the moon going to disrupt some sort of frequency cloaking technology? So, you know, people then going to start to see actually who walks amongst us. It all start to get really David Icke. And actually some of his theories, he talks a lot about David Icke, about the Saturn moon matrix, that there's a strange frequency field or blanket that emits from these two entities and actually kind of creates this matrix-like existence. So we're not seeing the full spectrum of what there is to see in our reality. So it really leans into that theory, basically. So yeah, it's just a strange article to be released at that particular point in time. So this video just was inspired by that particular article. So I'll play that for you now.
What if I told you that the dragons never left? The draconians, the dracos, the dragons are the same thing as the reptilians. The reason that we cannot see them anymore is because they put up the moon, which is their satellite, for beaming down the frequency that disrupts our visual cortex, creating the illusion that the reptilian race is not real and that they are actually humans. The last mention in ancient texts of dragons was with the Greeks. There's a time mentioned by the Greek philosophers called Arcadia. Arcadia was before the moon. The moon is what emits the frequency that is blasted upon our visual cortex, creating the illusion that these reptilians are human. And that is why we have not seen or heard of any dragons in our history after this time period. Quetzalcoatl was a reincarnation of Thoth. Historians have made great comparisons between Quetzalcoatl and Jesus Christ, but they were all pushed aside because obviously Jesus Christ, or Yeshua, was not a lizard. But the story in the Bible of Yeshua came after Arcadia, came after the moon was placed into our atmosphere, which then sent the frequency upon everyone's visual cortex to trick them that the reptilians were humans. History is his story. They have changed all of history, and now we are starting to see the truth. I bet my bottom dollar that the real story of the Midnight Bride of Paul Revere, where he rode from town to town on horseback saying, "The British are coming! The British are coming! Sound the alarms! Ring the bells!" They were being told to ring the bells so they could see what was actually coming into their city, which was the reptilian race, because these bells disrupted the frequency from the moon that was being placed upon our visual cortex so that we thought that they were humans, or the British invading, but it was actually the reptilians. I wasn't sure how they were placing this frequency into our visual cortex, but then I had an epiphany. Obviously, it's the moon. Because for a while, I was thinking some Austin Powers, sharks with freaking laser beams. But obviously, that's not the truth. The moon makes a lot more sense. I'll also postulate the idea that a doorbell was actually designed for you to know if there was a person or a reptilian at your doorstep before you answered it. And that the bells in the churches were actually used to make sure that there wasn't a reptilian hiding in their congregation. We need to find a way to rekindle the lost art of bell making and start the Bellvolution. This is why the dragons fell off the face of the earth and they were never written about again, because they have been cloaked by the frequency produced by the moon. This is also undoubtedly the reason for Easter eggs. It is not because of a bunny, it is because dragons come from eggs. Not only that, but the reason for the holiday Easter comes from the goddess of sex and prostitution, Ishtar. Ishtar was also a dragon, and her consort was Tammuz, the sun god, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So it's looking like Yeshua, our Lord and Savior, was actually the father of dragons. Now everything is finally starting to make sense.
Mad stuff, isn't it? I like what he said about Bellvolution. I thought it was quite cool. Yeah, I mean, I always consider bells as a device of healing. You know, you have bells in bell towers of churches and cathedrals, and I always perceived that being part of the technology for physical and spiritual healing and upliftment. So that was always my take. And yeah, that was just quite a wild take on the idea of like what bells were potentially used for. On the more spiritual side of the solar eclipse, I was just seeing a lot of posts to do with humanity now embodying these higher frequencies, and you know, things are maybe going to ramp up, get more intense, because now we know we've been bombarded with higher and higher frequencies. So things may get more and more intense as a result, as a fight back against that sort of leveling up in a way. Yeah, so we'll just have to see how it all plays out. But so far, so good. I almost forgot Dolores Cannon. I mentioned that earlier on in the podcast. Yeah, so this idea from Dolores Cannon, who again is a hypnotist, and she used to regress lots of people and just discovered the whole reincarnation cycle of the galactic universe. And you've got these souls coming in to help humanity through this big transition, and they perceived as being different waves. And I just started to see correlation with some of my own life and her description of what she describes as the second wave. Anyway, I found this article on awaken.com. Again, I'll put the link in the description. But it's the article, I'll just read a lot of it, to be honest, is probably best. to understand. So yeah, it starts the first wave of these souls in their late 40s to early 60s, after dropping the bomb at the end of the 1940s, now have the most difficult time adjusting. They don't like the violence, the ugliness, and they find this world and want to return home, even though they have no idea consciously where that might be. Emotions disturb and even paralyze them, especially strong ones like anger and hate. They cannot handle being around people expressing them. These dramatically affect them, and as though emotions are foreign to them, they are used to peace and love because that's what they experienced when they came from. Even though these people seem to have a good life, loving family, and a good job, many of them try to commit suicide. There seems to be no logical reason, yet they are so unhappy they don't want to be here. The second wave are now in their late 20s and 30s. They are moving through life much more easily. They are generally focused on helping others, creating no karma, and normally going unnoticed. They have been described as antennas, beacons, generators, channels of energy. They have come in with a unique energy that greatly affects others. They don't have to do anything. They just have to be. I've been told that just by walking through a crowded mall or grocery store, their energy affects everyone they come into contact with. It is that strong, and of course, they do not realize this consciously. The paradox is, although they are supposed to be affecting people by their energy, they don't feel comfortable being around people. So many of them stay home, secluded, to avoid mixing with others, even working from their homes. Thus, they are defeating their purpose. Many of the first and second wave do not want to have children. They unconsciously realize that children create karma, and they don't want to have anything to tie them here. They just want to do their job, get out of here. Many of them don't marry unless they are lucky enough to find another of their own kind. The third wave are the new children, many of whom are now in their teens. They have come in with knowledge needed on an unconscious level. The DNA of everyone on Earth is being altered at the present time and changed in order to adjust to a new vibration and frequency. But the DNA of the new children has already been altered, and they are prepared to process with little or no problems. Of course, many of these children are misunderstood by the schools and sadly being medicated. A recent medical report has now announced that 100 million children have been misdiagnosed with ADHD and put on Ritalin and other drugs. There is nothing wrong with these children. They are just more advanced and operating on a different frequency. Because they are so intelligent, they can become easily bored at school. I have been told that they need challenges to keep them interested. This group has been called the hope of the world. Some of these children are only 9 or 10 years old and have already graduated from college. They are forming organizations, and amazing, these are organizations that help children of the world. So yeah, I would perceive myself, but I mean, this article is obviously, she has a series of books. I think it's like The Convoluted Universe. I think I've read the first one, and she talks about these ways of volunteers, and that's where I became aware of this concept. But yeah, again, my propensity to kind of wander around on my own. I'm still single. I don't have children. Yeah, I'd seem to fit into this second wave bracket of being, and it's all about energy for me. I can kind of feel energy. Yeah, so it does seem to fit my lifestyle quite well. Yeah, maybe I'm being a little bit presumptuous, but there is a lot of correlations. Yeah, but yeah, I just thought it was an interesting piece to kind of talk about. And yeah, for the third wave, it's fascinating. There's a girl I'm working with. Well, she's not a girl; she's a lady. Obviously, because this article was written a long time ago, so everyone's a lot older. There are details from these age brackets, but she's very much younger than me, and she's just so amazing with her talents. And I can just see her fitting into this third wave quite easily. I'm just so impressed with her kind of psychic levels and just her understanding of the human body and just the whole kind of cosmic spectrum of what's going on at the moment with energy. And some of the meditations I sort of done with her online, just like a whole group class she kind of runs, have been incredible actually. So yeah, I kind of can see some of these people in the third wave actually operating in the earth at this current time. So it's very exciting. So I think we're drawing to a close here. In conclusion, looks like in the future I'll be maybe taking a camera outdoors into the exterior world, trying to have some adventures, just trying to get myself out and, away from a computer screen. And yeah, what was really bizarre was I noticed that Miles Johnson from the Basis Project and Maria Wheatley were organising or have organised a tour of Rendlesham Forest. It's like a 2-day event where she's going to be actually dowsing some of the energies there and talking about some of the energies at these military bases and what happens after these sort of contact experiences. And yeah, I think Miles Johnson's going to be discussing more of the nuts and bolts things to do with some of the insiders, some of the information. So just really strange that I've been talking about this Rendlesham thing recently, and that tour came up. So maybe I was just tuning into their activity in some way. It just influenced me. Yeah, just really bizarre. And I only noticed like a day or two ago. Yeah, so that's quite cool. So yeah, have a look on their website. So they got details of that tour that's coming up. I think it's towards the end of May. I might see if I can go myself. Yeah, so that's to come. And yeah, just again going back to that Rendlesham Forest 1980's connection with that and Todmorden, really crazy. And I did think actually maybe there was some connection with, there's a lot of sci-fi films that have been released, particularly Star Wars. I think it was first released around about 1977. And I think in the 1980s it was The Empire Strikes Back, which is the middle one of the original films that kind of came out, and maybe that in some way influenced the collective consciousness. Maybe that's why people started having more UFO sightings. I don't know, or maybe there's nothing to do with that, and there was genuinely a lot of UFOs flying around. That would also make sense. But yeah, it's also important to point that out as well, I think. And the severed hands, the hand of glory. I mean, really grim, as I said. The level of violence and grisly stuff that used to happen back then is hard to really fathom. Yeah, how you'd be cutting bits off a body of a dead condemned man and perceiving it having these really potent, occult powers. Really horrific. If someone did that now, everyone would be freaked out. But it's strange, through the passage of time, these things, the potency kind of goes away a bit, and you find this object is an object of fascination that ends up in a museum. But if someone did that last week, they wouldn't put that in a museum, would they? It would be probably incinerated or buried. So it's kind of strange how our approach to these subjects changes over the passage of time. And the 2024 big solar eclipse. Yep, lots of stories, been lots and lots of content, been fun looking through a lot of them. We're all still here on terra firma. Again, I have to see if anything pops up over the next few days and weeks. But yes, all great, all good fun stuff. And thank you so much for joining me. I've been Reconsider Simon. You can catch me on all video streaming platforms, like YouTube and Rumble and BitChute. I tend to get more views actually on Rumble and BitChute. BitChute a lot, particularly. It's hard to tell whether they're bots or actual people. YouTube's rubbish for me anyway. Yes, but you can still find me on all those platforms. Also Odyssey, in which I get 0 views on that one, apart from the old one. But I'll still keep posting on there anyway. And then you can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms as well. And I have my website, which is reconsidersimon.com, and I will catch you later. And have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Take care. Bye-bye.